Welcome back to Green Dolphin Science, everyone. We've got another deep dive for you today, and we're looking at some, well, pretty unconventional source material. We're talking about using wastewater analysis to understand alcohol consumption patterns.
Yeah, specifically in China. It's a field called Wastewater-Based Epidemiology, or WBE.
Right. And the source we're digging into is a research paper published in Drug and Alcohol Dependence.
The title is Assessing Alcohol Consumption in a Chinese Urban Population and a University Town Using High Temporal Resolution Wastewater-Based Epidemiology. The authors are from unis in Australia and China, a collaborative effort.
Okay, so our mission here is really to unpack what this study found. Not just, how much people in these specific areas were drinking, but when, the patterns.
Exactly, and that when part, well, it holds some real surprises.
Yeah, I saw that. It hints that the drinking pattern might not follow that typical Western weekend peak we often assume. Really challenges things.
It does. But first, maybe we should quickly explain what WBE actually is.
Good idea. Wastewater-based epidemiology. Sounds a bit technical, maybe even a little unpleasant.
Maybe. But think of it simply. It's like getting a snapshot of a whole community's habits or even health just by analyzing what goes down the drain.
Okay.
So everything flushed or poured away ends up in the sewer system, right? Heading to a treatment plant. When people consume things, alcohol, drugs, medicines, their bodies process them, and specific byproducts, metabolites, get excreted. And those metabolites travel in the wastewater.
So instead of asking people surveys where, let's be honest, recall can be fuzzy or, people might underreport.
Exactly. Bias is a real issue with surveys.
You're getting this objective chemical signal of what the whole community connected to that sewer is consuming.
Precisely. You take samples at the wastewater treatment plant inlet, that's a pooled sample from everyone upstream, measure the concentration of a specific biomarker, factor in the water flow rate, the population size, and you can estimate the total consumption for that group.
Like a giant anonymous collective biological sample.
That's a good way to put it. No individual privacy issues, no recall bias. For alcohol, this study used a biomarker called ethyl sulfate, ETS.
ETS. Okay.
It's a metabolite your body makes after drinking ethanol, the alcohol in drinks. It's pretty stable in wastewater, which makes it a good indicator. So basically, more ETS in the sample means more alcohol was consumed recently by that community.
Fascinating tech. So where did they actually do this study in China, and what kind of sampling did they manage?
Right. So they focused on a city in southern China, 2 specific areas served by different treatment plants.
Okay.
Area 1 was a large urban catchment. Think general population, like 500,000 residents. And here, they got daily samples for a whole year, November 2017 to October 2018.
Daily? For a year. Wow, that's high-resolution data.
It really is. That's crucial for seeing detailed time trends.
And the second area?
That was a university town catchment.
Yeah.
It took wastewater from 10 university campuses, so around 200,000 people, and the paper says about 80% were students.
Okay, a student-heavy area. Sure. And the sampling there?
For the university town, it was weekly samples, specifically every Wednesday.
Just Wednesdays. Why only Wednesdays? Seems like you'd miss potential weekend stuff.
Yeah, the paper doesn't explicitly state why only Wednesdays. Could be logistical reasons, funding, maybe they wanted a stable midweek baseline, but you're right, it means we don't get that daily picture, the weekend comparison, specifically for the student group from this data.
But they did get the daily data for the big urban area.
Exactly, and that's where the really striking temporal patterns emerge.
Got it. So daily for urban, weekly for the uni town. They measure ETS, calculate consumption per person. The unit was EPD.
Yep, milliliters of pure ethanol per person aged 15 plus per day, EPD.
Right. So what were the overall levels? How much were people drinking on average?
Okay, so for the large urban catchment, the average was 1.4 EPD, standard deviation of 0.6. The daily numbers varied quite a bit, though, from 0.2 up to 4.9 EPD on some days.
1.4 on average. And the university town?
Remarkably similar. Average 1.3 EPD. Also with a standard deviation of 0.6. The range was a bit tighter, 0.3 to 2.6 EPD.
Wait a sec. 1.4 EPD for the general city area and 1.3 EPD for the area that's 80% students? They're almost identical. That's surprising, isn't it? You might instinctively think students drink more or at least have a higher average.
That was definitely one of the key findings they highlighted. And importantly, they detected ETS in every single sample from both places. So drinking wasn't rare, it was widespread.
Right.
But yes, that similar average per capita level between the general urban population and the university town population was notable. And the paper does mention alcohol is readily available on campuses in China.
Okay, so 1.3, 1.4 EPD, how does that compare internationally? Like, put that number in context using other WBE studies.
Yeah.
Is that high? Low?
Good question. Context is key here. These levels are actually much lower than many findings from Western countries.
Oh, really? Like how much lower?
Well, the paper cites a WBE study on a U.S. university campus that found an average of 14 EPD.
14, compared to 1.3 here. Wow.
Yeah, big difference. And studies in general population, say in Australia, found ranges like 15.7 to 19.0 EPD. Barcelona, Spain, reported 7.8 to 21 EPD.
Okay, so we're talking consumption levels here that are like 10 times lower, sometimes even more than in some of those other cities or campuses.
Exactly. It's a significant difference. Now, it's not the lowest ever recorded. They mentioned it was higher than a university study in Greece, which was super low, less than 0.06 EPD. And it falls within the range seen in Turkey, which was 0.7 to 9.0 EPD.
Interesting.
It was also a bit lower than a previous WBE estimate from the same city back in 2016, which was 1.84 EPD. And quite a bit lower than China's estimated national average for 2016, which was around 8.1 EPD based on other methods.
Okay, so a complex picture. Lower than many Western places, maybe lower than recent national estimates, but not rock bottom globally. Did the author suggest why the levels in these specific areas might be lower than, say, Australia or the U.S. average?
They did speculate on potential reasons for the lower overall averages compared to places like Australia. One factor could be lower drinking prevalence, basically. A smaller percentage of the population drinks at all.
Okay.
They cite survey data suggesting about 56% of men and only 15% of women in China are current drinkers. Compare that to Australia, where it's like 85% of men and 73% of women.
Big difference in just who is drinking.
Right. And then they also suggest maybe lower average quantities consumed per occasion and potentially less frequent or intense binge drinking. They quote binge rates around 31% for Chinese men, but only 4% for women, versus about 36% overall in Australia.
So fewer drinkers overall, and maybe those who do drink, consume less per session or binge less often than in some other countries. That would definitely lower the population average seen in wastewater.
Makes sense, right? Both prevalence and quantity drive that total ETS signal.
Okay, that covers the amount. But you said the really surprising part was the pattern, the timing. Let's get into that. What did that year of daily data from the big urban catchment show about when the drinking happens?
Yeah, this is where it gets really counterintuitive compared to Western patterns. In most WBE studies from Europe, Australia, North America, you see a very clear weekly rhythm.
Right, the weekend effect. Lower during the week, then a big spike Friday, Saturday.
Exactly. Consumption peaks significantly on the weekend, tied to socializing, recreation, days off.
Makes sense.
But in this urban Chinese catchment, they found alcohol consumption on weekends average 1.5 EPD was statistically the same as consumption on weekdays, which averaged 1.4 EPD.
Wait, no difference. No weekend peak at all, just flat.
Essentially flat. No significant difference between weekdays and weekends.
That is really different. Wow.
And it didn't stop there. They also looked at official holidays versus non-holidays in that urban area. Same story. Average 1.5 EPD on holidays, 1.4 EPD on non-holidays. No significant difference there either.
So drinking levels are just steady, not just Monday to Sunday, but even during holiday periods. That really begs the question, why? If it's not driven by weekend leisure like in the West, what is driving this consistent pattern? What's their hypothesis?
Culture. This is where the study really leans into the unique cultural and social context of China.
Okay.
They point strongly towards the role of alcohol in business drinking. Social activities that are really intertwined with professional life, relationship building, networking.
Ah, right. The idea of drinking with clients, colleagues, bosses.
The Ganbi culture?
Precisely. In many business contexts, sharing drinks is seen as really important, almost, essential sometimes for building trust, sealing deals, even career advancement.
And crucially, that kind of stuff doesn't just happen on Fridays.
Exactly. Business meetings, client dinners, team bonding that can happen any day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
So if drinking is deeply integrated into the work week itself,
It could explain why you don't see that dip during the week, followed by a weekend surge. The weekday professional and social drinking effectively props up the levels,
Yeah.
flattening the curve across the whole week.
That provides a really plausible explanation for such a different pattern. It's not just weekend fun, it's part of the weekday professional fabric, too. That's the core hypothesis. It contrasts sharply with cultures where alcohol is mostly confined to weekend socializing or personal relaxation.
Does any other data back this up, this idea of significant weekday drinking?
Yeah, the authors mention supporting evidence from studies on drink driving in China.
Oh, interesting. What do those show?
Apparently, those studies often find that the prevalence of drink driving in China is similar on weekdays compared to weekends, or sometimes even higher during the week.
Which is the opposite of places like the UK or Scandinavia, right? Where drunk driving incidents usually peak on weekends along with the drinking.
Exactly. So the fact that drink driving isn't just a weekend problem in China aligns quite well with this WBE data showing consistent consumption throughout the week. It strengthens the cultural argument.
It really paints a coherent picture. Okay, what about other time trends? Do they see, like, seasonal changes, summer versus winter?
For the main urban catchment with the daily data, nope. No significant seasonal variation was detected. Consumption levels were pretty stable year-round.
Another point of difference, maybe. Sometimes you hear about higher summer drinking.
True, but not here, apparently. However, in the university town catchment, they did see a seasonal difference.
Okay. What happened there?
Consumption was significantly lower, specifically in the spring quarter compared to the other seasons.
Why spring?
Their explanation is pretty straightforward. Population changes. Spring in China includes the major winter school vacation and the Lunar New Year festival.
So lots of students probably leave campus and go home during that period.
Exactly. Fewer people contributing to the wastewater in that specific university catchment means lower total ETS detected, leading to a lower calculated per capita average for that period. It's likely more about population flux than a change in habits for those remaining.
Got it. That makes sense. And any longer-term trends, like was consumption going up or down during the year they studied?
Within that specific 2017-2018 study period, the levels in both areas were stable. They didn't detect a significant overall increase or decrease over that 1 year.
Okay, so stable week to week, largely stable season to season apart from population shifts, and stable over the years studied.
That's the picture this WBE data gives us for these locations during that time.
It's really striking how this objective data reveals a pattern you just wouldn't guess by looking at, say, Western norms. Let's connect this back. What does understanding this unique pattern, the flat week, the weekday drinking, mean for public health efforts in China? What's the so what?
Well, it's hugely important. As the paper notes, alcohol is a major preventable risk factor for lots of health problems in China: liver disease, cancer, accidents, you name it.
Right.
So if public health strategies are designed assuming drinking mainly happens on weekends, like maybe focusing interventions on bars and clubs on Friday nights,
They could completely miss a huge chunk of the actual consumption that's happening during weekday business lunches or social events related to work.
precisely. A campaign focused only on responsible weekend drinking might just not land effectively. Understanding this weekday component means policies probably need to be adapted. Maybe interventions need to target different settings, like workplaces, or address the cultural norms around business drinking more directly.
So WBE data like this could help tailor those strategies.
Definitely. The authors suggest that while China uses things like alcohol taxes, other policies like restrictions on sales times, advertising limits, health warnings, these are maybe less consistently applied. This kind of data could help pinpoint when and where interventions might have the most impact. It really highlights the need for culturally specific public health approaches.
It's a powerful argument for using local, objective data instead of just importing assumptions from elsewhere.
Absolutely. WBE is proving to be a valuable tool for that kind of public health surveillance.
Now, no study is perfect. Did the authors talk about any limitations, things to keep in mind?
Yes, they did. They were quite upfront. First, location. This was one city in southern China. It's a big country, very diverse. Patterns in rural areas or even other cities might be different, so we can't necessarily extrapolate these findings to all of China.
Fair point. One city isn't the whole nation.
Second, WBE gives you population-level totals and trends. It tells you how much is consumed by the group, but not who is doing the drinking or how they're drinking. Like, it doesn't easily distinguish moderate daily drinking from less frequent binge drinking within that average. It might underestimate some high-risk patterns that individual surveys could potentially capture better.
Right, you see the average tide level, but not the individual big waves or ripples.
Exactly. And third, they mentioned genetics, specifically the ALDH2 allele, which is common in East Asian populations, including southern China. It affects how people metabolize alcohol, often causing an unpleasant flushing reaction. It can act as a kind of protective factor against heavy drinking for people who have it. So the presence of this allele in the population could influence the overall level of consumption compared to populations where it's less common.
But probably not the pattern across the week.
That's what they suggest. The allele prevalence isn't changing day to day, so it's less likely to explain the flat temporal pattern, even if it contributes to the lower overall average.
Okay, those are important caveats for a balanced view. So let's try and summarize this deep dive. What's the single biggest takeaway from peering into China's wastewater?
I think the main takeaway is twofold. First, the power of WBE itself as an objective tool to uncover hidden population behaviors. And second, what it revealed here. A really distinct alcohol consumption pattern in this urban Chinese setting. Stable levels across weekdays and weekends, very different from the weekend peaks common elsewhere.
And that difference seems tightly linked to cultural factors, especially how alcohol is woven into business and professional life during the work week.
Exactly. Culture shaping consumption in a very direct, measurable way.
It really makes you think. So for you listening, what stands out here? Does this change how you think about the connection between culture and everyday habits like drinking?
Yeah, and maybe a final thought to chew on. What other assumptions do we make about how people live, based on our own surroundings or traditional data, that might be challenged by looking at populations through unconventional lenses like this? WBE gives us this unique, objective glimpse beneath the surface of society. What else is flowing hidden in plain sight?